This is the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast. Together, we'll unpack fantasy, life, and faith. We're not experts necessarily, but rather fantasy coaches here to encourage you and help you win while also finding meaning and purpose throughout the fantasy season. We won't always be right, but we hope we'll be convincing. I'm coming to you from the Unpacking It Ministry studio here in Charlotte, North Carolina. We will be joined by Harrison Zuckerberg in just a moment. I'm Bryce Johnson, glad to be with you today. And today on the show, we are going to talk rookies to target. We're going to talk about quarterbacks that we like in the top 10 and our quarterback approach when it comes to drafting. And then our breakout topic each week on the show, we do a breakout. So we take a fantasy concept, relate it to life and faith. And this week we're talking about the gut feeling when it comes to fantasy. All right, what do we have a gut feeling about this year? So we're going to talk breakouts, busts, and guys that are going to bounce back. And then also how all of that relates to walking with Jesus and the Holy Spirit and the gut feeling that goes a little bit deeper than a fantasy gut feeling. So we'll get to all that in just a little bit. But first, let's say hello to Harrison. Man, training camps have begun. Here we go. Is there one thing that's jumped out to you already, just with some of the initial news and notes and kind of the craziness already with the hype machine and some of the practice reports?
Yeah, so a lot of things that have jumped out to me are not the hype machine, but rather guys who are already injured or were concerned about being injured before training camp even starts. There's a lot of guys who we were told, like Jonathan Taylor, oh, he's going to be 100% going into the season. Don't even worry about the injuries from last year. But he's on the PUP to start training camp. What's going on with that? Guys like J.K. Dobbins, he's not showing up for camp. Kadarius Toney already has an injury to his knee. I mean, there's a lot of skepticism for me right now along guys who, we were told the injuries aren't going to be there. They're going to be ready to go. But if you aren't practicing, that's clearly not the case. So what opportunities does this open up for the players behind them who can maybe now seize this role in training camp and run with it starting the season?
That's a great point, because I have to admit that when I hear the injury reports in my head, I'm crossing them off my list. and so, and all of a sudden I go, I don't want that guy. I don't want that guy. I don't want that guy. And in some cases, that's the right decision. But we also have to see the big picture, recognize it's still July. There is time for guys to heal and be good to go. And when it comes to veteran guys, most of them will be fine. Like if they get a little banged up in practice, they miss a day, they miss a week, we have to be, all right, let's be understanding. But when it comes to rookies or guys fighting for kind of a spot on the depth chart, I'm a little more concerned, because if you get behind a day, a week, that matters. That really does. And especially with teams that have new coaching, staffs, all of that factors in too. Of course you have some built-in credibility with what you've already done on film if you're a veteran, but these rookie guys, you got to prove yourself in training camp to get out on the field to start the season. So yes, the injury reports are, it's a lot to navigate this time of year. And so we'll try to help you along the way in the coming weeks. But first off, we're going to jump into some bounce backs, some players that we think will bust this year, and guys that will break out. And so we will begin with some bounce backs. All right, who from last year, let us down, had a horrible year, maybe injury, maybe just production, a combination of both, but you believe will be much better this year. Harrison, you lead us off.
The first guy for me is Justin Herbert. If you took Justin Herbert last year in drafts, you were really disappointed because you were hoping that he was going to be a guy who was going to score 25 plus fantasy points every week and was going to be right up there with the Joe Burrows, the Patrick Mahomes, the Josh Allens of the world. And obviously that didn't happen. But we know a lot of that was because obviously there were a ton of injuries around him to his main wide receivers. But I think the most important thing to look at is, even with all of those injuries and the efficiency that dropped, Herbert had 10 less touchdowns than expected last year, given his volume and the way the offense was performing around him. Whether that be, wide receiver gets dragged down at the 1 yard line and then they run it in with Austin Eckler, or, a ball is dropped in the end zone. Plays that weren't necessarily his fault, but were just because of, luck or maybe one thing going the other way when it didn't really, go his way to get a touchdown out of it. 10 less touchdowns. So if we just see a positive regression from that number, he's already going to have a bounce back if he has 10 more touchdowns this year than he did last year, just by meeting the expectation. But if he exceeds the expectation and is even better with the additions of Quentin Johnson and Kellen Moore as an offensive coordinator, I think he's going to have a huge bounce back year and going to remind people why they drafted him as a top 5 QB just a year ago.
I'm with you. I want him on my teams when I can get him. So we'll talk more quarterbacks later in the show. The one bounce back player for me leading off is Brandon Cooks. And I find myself buying into the Cowboys offense this year. CeeDee Lamb, I think he's going to be awesome. Tony Pollard finally taking over for Zeke in a full-time way. I think that's going to open things up. And then they add Brandon Cooks. Now, Brandon Cooks throughout his career has been consistent. He was awesome at with multiple teams. And when he was playing alongside Cooper Kupp with the Rams, he was productive. And he got lost in Houston last year. And, that was a disaster of a situation. And I think there has been this narrative, and even that I've bought into over the years. Brandon Cooks is always injured, or he might get concussions or that kind of thing. That's an old narrative. He was a little banged up last year, but it was also his year in Houston. Was he rushing back to make it for a playoff push? Absolutely not. So he's going to go to Dallas, and to be the number 2 receiver next to CeeDee Lamb in an offense where we know Dak likes to throw, and Pollard's great out of the backfield, and so it'll be a passing offense. There will be enough for Brandon Cooks. You can get him much later in drafts, and I think he will not only live up to where you have to draft him, but he'll actually exceed expectations many different weeks. All right, who else is a bounce back for you?
The next one for me is Antonio Gibson. Now, he's been one of my favorite players since he's entered the league, and for good reason, because he's had over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns his first 2 seasons in the league. Just an absolute stud for the Commanders. And then last year, just was not effective or really utilized the right way in the offense at all. Was not used in the passing game. That is all going to change with Eric Bieniemy coming over this season. I believe that last year was an outlier from those first 2 years that he had. We've already heard reports. He himself has said, yes, I'm going to play the third down receiving running back role in this offense, a role that we saw Jerick McKinnon have great fantasy success in last year, a role that we've seen guys like Clyde Edwards-Helaire have success in. Antonio Gibson is a much more talented, younger, more explosive player than any of the running backs that Kansas City had who have been successful in fantasy. I think he's going to be a focal point again this year in the offense. He's going to be a safety blanket and check down for first-year QB Sam Howell, and I think he's going to come back to having a great season like he did his first 2 years in the NFL.
Yes, and Washington will be down in games, needing to throw, little dump-offs. Gibson will benefit. Absolutely. All right, so the other bounce back for me, A.J. Dillon. Now, he's been one of those players that I've pounded the table for, and we'll do that segment in the coming weeks for this year, the guys that we really love. So Dillon has been one of those guys for me. This has to be the bounce back year for him, right? It just with the offense changing, with Aaron Rodgers leaving, I think they've got to rely on the run game even more, and I think Dillon will just get more opportunity, and so we know the talent's there. We have seen the glimpses of his production. He's a really good running back, and I just hope that they feed him, maybe even more so at the goal line this year as well. Rodgers always liked to get his touchdowns, and he wanted to be the hero. I think with Jordan Love, you got to ease him in, run the ball. A.J. Dillon can be that ground and pound guy for Green Bay. And I think touchdowns will be key for him to truly emerge, obviously, because he's not necessarily going to be the pass catching back because Aaron Jones is still there. But if for any reason Jones is injured, Dillon gets even more opportunity in that regard too. Oh boy, then we're loving life, because now Dillon, everybody's over Dillon. He's falling in drafts. You can get him much later. Could be nice. So, all right, now let's get to our breakout players, guys that we think this is the year they become stars. And these are most likely really young guys that this is their chance. So, and we're talking when they break out into relatively elite status. And so, who are those guys for you?
The first guy for me is George Pickens from the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, we
Ooh.
saw the highlight catches as a rookie that he was making one-handed grabs all over the field. We obviously know the talent and how explosive he is, but where was the production last season? What did we see from him as a rookie? Now, Pickens had less than 100 targets last year, but he was extremely efficient, having over 800 yards receiving on 18 yards per reception. The only rookie receivers to put up these numbers on less than 100 targets in the last 10 years are T.Y. Hilton, Josh Gordon, DeAndre Hopkins, Juju Smith-Schuster, A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, and Terry McLaurin, and then George Pickens. Now, what's the one thing that all of those guys have in common? They are awesome fantasy players and great NFL players. They were raw as a rookie, but you saw flashes of how explosive they could be when they got the opportunity. But how early do they get that opportunity? Does it take multiple years for them to develop? That is not the case. In their sophomore season, all of those players became stars. Not one of them had under 1,000 yards receiving, and the average stat line for those guys was 84 receptions for over 1,200 yards and 6 touchdowns. We know that the Pittsburgh Steelers offense should improve this year with Kenny Pickett in his second season. Deontay Johnson has never really been anything outstanding from them. I know you like Pat Freiermuth, but I think as far as receivers go, Pickens is going to be the guy there. That's what they drafted him to be. I am not going to bet that he is the one guy on that list who doesn't turn into a star wide receiver. I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by how great George Pickens is this year.
I'm buying the Steelers as a bounce back team and Kenny Pickett taking the next step. So yeah, I'm with you. And I'll talk about Freiermuth in a little bit. But
Pickett
first I
to
want to say
Pickens. It just works. Pickett to Pickens
that's
over and
it.
over.
That's right. That's right. So the breakout player for me is Chris Olave, and he's the wide receiver of the Saints. Last year he finished top 24, and so he's already shown what he's capable of. That was with Andy Dalton. Derek Carr is better than Andy Dalton, and we know that Derek Carr has allowed Devontae Adams to be unbelievable, even Hunter Renfrow to have an incredible season a couple years ago. So he's Derek Carr can throw, and he can throw for big yardage, and Olave is going to be the key guy there. Michael Thomas, hopefully he is out there because that'll garner a little bit of attention. But Michael Thomas is not the same player he was 5 years ago, not even close. But he'll be that's fine. And I even like their young guy Rashid. I'm thinking
Shaheed.
of a Duke player. What is it?
Shaheed.
I was going to say Rashid Suleiman from Duke, former Duke player. So thank you. But so I like their wide receiving core overall. But Olave is special. He's the one that has the ability to be an elite receiver, especially now coming into his second season from the get go, being the go to guy. And the Saints, they're going to be a little bit better this year, but they're still going to be down in a lot of games. They're going to have to throw a lot. I'll talk about their rookie running back in a little bit, but for the most part, they're not going to be a dominant running team. They're going to be throwing the ball. So Olave should be the guy. All right. Who's another one for you? Breakouts.
Another one for me is James Cook. And this one, I think a lot of people aren't super high on James Cook because, he didn't get a ton of work as a rookie. They brought in Damian Harris, but we know what Damian Harris is. He's never been healthy in his career. He's just a consistent guy. And I think Cook is the one who is going to break out in the Bills' backfield. I mean, he is just a good running back. Last year as a rookie, he was number one in the entire NFL, not just for rookies, the entire NFL in breakaway run weight, second in the NFL in true yards per carry, and third in the NFL in yards per touch. Those are elite numbers. I think he just needs more opportunities in this offense. And now that, unfortunately, Naheem Hines got injured this week, I mean, prayers for him and the rest of his career, but that opens up, no competition in the third down role for James Cook. I don't think he needs to be a 20-plus carry guy. I think Damian Harris can still be the lead back. But if James Cook fills that, early career Tony Pollard, Austin Eckler role where he's getting 10 carries, but then also 5 receptions, and he's explosive with those carries, I think he's going to be a steal in fantasy drafts just on that floor value alone. But then what if he does take over the lead running back role from Damian Harris about halfway through the season and is getting 15, 16 carries a game? That is going to be a top 15 running back for sure in this Bills offense.
My only pushback is I love Damian Harris, and I think Damian Harris could get a lot of goal line work. So a lot of touchdowns for Harris. The Bills offense is so good. There should be enough points available for both of those guys to be fantasy relevant this year. But you're right. Cook has the chance to really break out and be a star. No question about it. All right, the player for me, we'll wrap up with breakouts. I'll say Alexander Mattison in Minnesota. I have watched and kept an eye on Madison over the years, and there were 2 years in 2020 and 2021. Every time Dalvin Cook went down, Madison would come in and put up huge production. And last year, Dalvin Cook was healthy. Madison didn't play much. Everybody's forgotten about Madison. Everybody's kind of given up on him. And so, during that time when he was filling in, regularly for Dalvin Cook, he averaged, over 20 points in PPR. And so 90 rushing yards per game he averaged. And so he's shown he can be an RB1. The fantasy community so far is not valuing him. He's actually going a little bit later in drafts. He absolutely can be an RB1 this year. There's a reason that the Vikings gave up on a healthy Dalvin Cook, and they didn't pay him. They paid Madison to much less, but they believe in him. And so Madison wasn't able to play a lot last year to beef up his value to go on the open market, but he stuck around in Minnesota. You know who knows he's valuable? Minnesota. They wanted him to be their starting running back. And I do believe, on a side note, Minnesota could be one of those teams that takes a step back this year. I believe that narrative could be possible. Kirk Cousins getting toward, a little bit older. Maybe that's the case. It's still on paper a dynamic offense with Justin Jefferson, of course. Cousins throws it all over the field. They score points. They're gonna in their division. It's wide open. They definitely could win that division. And so if that is the case, Madison is going to be a part of that and a part of a lot of fantasy points. So I'm buying that Madison has a big season. So there you go. Have you done two? You did two. So there you go. There's our two breakouts for this year. Now we got to go on the negative side. We got to do some busts. And so these guys are, either ranked high, or maybe they're hyped, or maybe they were previously successful. But we're talking gut feeling. What is our gut feeling, right? We're talking breakouts, we're talking bounce backs, and now busts. What is our gut feeling? And so who do you feel like is going to bust this year?
The first guy for me is J.K. Dobbins. I know a lot of people in the fantasy community this year are really high on J.K. Dobbins, but how many years in a row are we going to tell ourselves that he's healthy? He's not practicing right now in training camp. The Ravens just signed Melvin Gordon because they know he isn't healthy. Now, things are getting desperate if you sign Melvin Gordon. I mean, wow. This offense in general is just not going to look anything like it has the last couple of years, where Baltimore's had some of the highest run rates in the NFL. They're going to be passing the ball a lot more. It's going to be a lot more centric on Lamar. And unfortunately for Dobbins, he is just not a good pass catcher. That's not what he has been in his career. So if he's only getting the early, down work, even if he is healthy and on the field, I don't see his stat lines for games be more than like 12 carries for 60 yards and then maybe a reception. And that gets you 7 or 8 points in fantasy. So you're pretty much betting on him to score double-digit touchdowns in this offense to be effective. That's not a bet that I want to make with other goal line guys like Gus Edwards, like Melvin Gordon there. I just don't see the upside for J.K. Dobbins to finish as a high-end RB2, which is where he is being drafted right now. That just makes no sense to me. And the fact that, we haven't even seen him on the field really at all in the last 3 seasons is just another red flag. I'm not going to make a bet on J.K. Dobbins.
I'm with you. I agree. Absolutely. So here are a couple guys I think will be busts. This one's kind of obvious. Well, we'll see. Josh Jacobs. And it's obvious because I think we understand guys that hold out, it provides big risk. And I was actually looking back. It was kind of an old article that I found on NFL.com. But guys like Steven Jackson, Maurice Jones-Drew, Chris Johnson, Larry Johnson, These guys held out. And the following year, they were disappointments, or the year that they held out. They were disappointments. They came off a big year. They held out. They think, I deserve more money. I'm going to have another big season. And so Josh Jacobs had a huge year last year, but he also had a lot of carries and a lot of touches. And, now Jimmy Garoppolo's there. We don't know what that's going to look like. I still don't trust Josh McDaniels. And so, and then with Josh Jacobs, it's sure there's some talent there, but he's also had some down seasons. He's already let us down in recent years. Last year was awesome. Don't get me wrong. He was great. He overachieved. He exceeded expectations. I just don't see that happening again. So I'm out on him. The other guy, this is very similar to Gabe Davis. And I think other people are making this comparison, but we saw with Christian Watson last year with Green Bay, he scored a ton of touchdowns in a short amount of time. Is that doable to do again? Aaron Rodgers isn't there anymore. Those are, it's great when you score touchdowns. Absolutely. But in some ways they're like a little fluky. It's not necessarily consistency. And he was sort of a hot name. And he is a hot name this year. I'm not willing to pay the price for Watson. So I'm out on him. And then lastly, the bust, DeAndre Hopkins. I told you last week that I'm out on the Titans. I don't want any Titans players this year. Hopkins going there does not change that. There have been a number of wide receivers that have gone there later in their career. Julio Jones comes to mind. Randy Moss. These guys, they Robert Woods even. I mean,
Andre Johnson.
Andre Johnson, thank you. I mean, this does not, I don't feel good about it. So the quarterback situation isn't great. And I think DeAndre Hopkins has the talent to be a Hall of Fame level wide receiver, but he's played with bad quarterbacks at times. And this is going to hurt him once again, being in Tennessee. So those are my busts. Give us one more. Sorry, I unloaded on my busts.
One more for me that I think a lot of people are not going to like to hear is Saquon Barkley. And this has nothing to do with the contract holdout. I would have had even more of a bust label on him if he did hold out, but he got his new contract, good for him. But the main thing is I think the Giants are going to be worse in 2023. They're going to be playing a harder schedule. I mean, we really saw who they were over the second half of last season as well. And this is really going to affect Saquon's volume and value for fantasy, in my opinion. Over the first half of the season, when the Giants were 7-2, Saquon was averaging 26 opportunities a game, which is just amazing. He gets an early first half lead, and then they ride him throughout the rest of the game, ground and pound, run the ball. Over the back half of the season, when the Giants were 2-5-1, Saquon only averaged 19.5 opportunities per game, nearly 7 opportunities less. If he is getting less touches, and now there's even more options there in the passing game. They bring in Darren Waller. They bring in a million receivers. I'm not going to say that they're good, but they're there. I don't see the volume and the touchdown upside for Saquon to finish as a top 5 running back again. I think he is going to be good. So I'm not going to necessarily label him a bust, but I think you're going to be very disappointed. If you're taking Saquon as the 4th running back off the board, at the end of the season, when he finishes as the RB 10 or 11, well, you can't really complain because he was still an RB1, technically speaking, but you're going to feel really bad if the guys like Tony Pollard, Bijan Robinson, and Nick Chubb, who went a couple picks after Saquon, all finished as top 5 running backs and were much better on a week-to-week basis than he was.
And that makes the difference. That really does. That top pick, that can sway things in a big way. So, yeah, I'm with you. It was nice. Last year, Barkley was a little underrated, and it was a bounce back season for him. And so now he carries more hype and expectations.
I agree. I think last year was great because you got him in the second, third round at a discount. He had a fantastic season, but his fantasy managers were not trying to chase what happened last year because, it almost never repeats itself where a guy is just as good as the year he was before when he has that breakout season. There's always a little bit of regression. So I think taking Saquon as the 3rd running back or 4th running back is just unreasonable, and you're trying to chase what happened last year. That's not what you should be expecting. You have to expect a completely new team because the Giants have a completely new team around him. His opportunity is going to be way different.
Yeah, I'm not buying the hype of the Giants either. I'm with you. And the one guy I do like is Darius Slayton. You can get him for free, basically. He's worth a flyer because he actually had pretty good production last year. But other than that, yeah, I'm not real in on the Giants this year. All right, so there you go. Those are some of our gut feelings in regards to bounce backs, breakouts, and busts. Let us know your thoughts. You can email me, Bryce at fantasyfootballfellowship.com. And we're going to continue this kind of conversation about gut feelings. And I want to take a look at the parallel to our own lives and faith. And so we'll get back to Harrison, and we'll talk some rookies and quarterbacks in just a little bit. But each week on the show, we do a breakout topic. We take a fantasy concept related to the Bible, related to our own lives, and we encourage you to sign up and become a member of Fantasy Football Fellowship, and you can gain access to all of our content, the fantasy content, the spiritual content, and the content designed for you and your league to participate in throughout the season. And so we encourage you to have league meetings to talk fantasy, to talk faith, to talk life, grow in your understanding of the Bible together. And so we provide what you need in order for that to happen. And so you can find out more information on fantasyfootballfellowship.com. But we also like to share the topics here on the show as well. And so this week's topic, it's all about the gut feeling. And so from a fantasy perspective, when we're on the clock, when it comes to drafting, we hopefully have done our research, right? We've done our reading. You've listened to this podcast, you listen to some other podcasts, and you have certain strategies and philosophies that you've developed over the years, and in your kind of thought process, your process decision making, your thought process. And so you utilize all of that and you tap into it. But then sometimes you just have to go with your gut. All of that factors in, it lays that foundation, but then you got to go with your gut. Who you going with? Is it Saquon? Are you going to go Saquon? Are you going to take Travis Kelce? And those choices end up happening during the draft. And so there are, just that countless times where you're factoring in all the different information and you go, oh, I just got to go with my gut. I got to go with my gut here. And let's face it, sometimes it works out great. Your gut was right. Oftentimes your gut may be wrong. And sometimes you go with your gut and it goes against conventional thinking. You look at all the information and you go, I still got to go with this guy. This is the one. This is my gut feeling tells me that I got to put him on my team. And so, the gut feeling, it can sometimes be trusted, but other times it will let you down. And when it comes to everyday life, we also have different approaches to our decision making. And hopefully, we're factoring in the stats and the facts in front of us, and we listen to advice from wise counsel, and we consider lessons we've learned from our past experiences, just like in fantasy. So there's a lot of similarities here. And then oftentimes, though, we do make decisions based on a gut feeling. And we're just like, I just got this feeling, this is what I need to do, or this is the direction I need to go. And I believe that this approach can be both dangerous, but also a wonderful approach. But here's the difference, and here's the encouragement for us today. Where is that gut feeling coming from? And why is it there? And so if we're living life to please ourselves and we're choosing to do whatever feels right, or we're operating with this limited understanding based on what we think is best, then our gut feeling will mislead us. If it's just based on what Bryce knows and the gut feeling that has a lot of Cheetos in there, then I'm going to be let down. But if my gut feeling is really the Holy Spirit within me as a follower of Jesus that is prompting me, that is convicting me, that I can't shake. I can't shake the gut feeling because it's a spirit feeling. It goes much deeper than the gut. It's within my heart, within my spirit, that the Holy Spirit is saying, go this way. Don't go that way. Bad idea. Not the wise thing to do. And so in Proverbs 16:25, it warns, there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. And so sometimes in our own mind and our own limited abilities, we, my way, my gut feeling, that's what I think is right. It's wrong. But when we live spirit-filled, and we're making wise decisions that are rooted in the understanding of God's word and in knowledge of his will and what he's revealed to us and what he is uh, prompting us to do, then we can trust that. And so the Spirit of God lives inside of us as followers of Jesus. And so are we yielding to that Spirit, to the Holy Spirit? And he gives us discernment and insight and intuition. And all of that is much stronger than just a gut feeling, than just a simple gut feeling. That's my gut feeling. And so we have to discern the difference. And there is a difference. Philippians 2:13 gives us this encouragement. For God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. And so if that gut feeling is leading us toward something good and pleasing and lines up with God's word, then that feeling is right. That's a spirit-led feeling. Now, if it's self-driven and oh my God, I got to do it. I want to do it. That's temptation. It's our own selfishness that kind of takes over there. And so oftentimes when we take steps of faith in life and we're like, man, I just conventional wisdom or conventional thinking, we'll say kind of what normal people would say to do is to go this way. But then the Spirit is leading us to go a different way. We got to follow that Spirit again, as long as it lines up with Scripture and it's truly the wise thing to do. Then that's the right gut feeling. And so we have to ask God for wisdom, ask him for discernment, and then follow those promptings of the Holy Spirit. And so lastly, Proverbs 2:6-11 tells us this: for the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He holds success in store for the upright. He is a shield to those whose walk is blameless, for he guards the course of the just and protects the way of his faithful ones. Then you will understand what is right and just and fair, every good path. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will protect you, and understanding will guard you. And so let's live spirit filled, and we'll be guided on the right path. And we'll have that spirit filled feeling, not just the selfish, limited, lame gut feeling. And so in fantasy, it's kind of limited to our own lame gut feeling, and it'll work sometimes, and other times it won't. But when we truly yield to the Holy Spirit, we'll remain on that right path. And so that's what matters even more than our fantasy picks sometimes. But I do think oftentimes in fantasy, following the gut can work well. It's an okay philosophy. But if that's all we're relying on, and we don't have enough solid reasoning for it, we'll be led astray for sure. All right, Harrison, let me get your initial thoughts on gut feeling approach to fantasy, and then we'll talk some rookies.
Yeah, so I think for gut feeling to fantasy, even if your gut feeling's wrong, sometimes, following your gut feeling always is more fun with fantasy football. At the end of the day, we're playing fantasy football to have fun and, to one up your friends on, oh, I called this guy was
That's
right.
right.
There's no reason where if you think a guy is good, you're going to beat yourself up on it way more if you pass on him and let someone else have him on your roster than, if you take him and he ends up being bad. If he ends up being bad, so what? But there's nothing worse than, having a feeling about a guy and then watching someone else reap the rewards of having them on his roster. It's about having fun. If they don't break out, it doesn't matter. But if they do break out, then they're probably going to be one of your favorite players forever. And you'll always be able to go into the drafts for years to come and be like, hey, remember when I took Darren Waller as the tight end 20 in the last round of our draft and he was a Pro Bowler that year? Yeah, they'll always remember that and you always be able to brag about it.
There are many reasons I love fantasy and the reasons that I play, but one of the driving joys and factors in me playing fantasy is getting the guy that I just have a gut feeling about, that maybe other people doubt or other people overlooked, and being able to call it. Say, I got that guy. I picked him. I was the first one to take him. I was the first one to get Travis Kelce, the first one to get Adam Thielen. Like those are fun. Those are fun draft picks. So you got to go for it sometimes. Absolutely. I can't remember what my feeling was on Travis Kelce, but I remember having him early in his career, and that was awesome. I haven't had him in years. This is the year. I'm trying to get back on the Kelsey train. So I hope he's still got one more big year in him. One more big year. All right. So let's talk some rookies. And so kind of initially, what is your approach to drafting rookies? And we're not going to go real in depth today because many of these players will continue to be talking about in the weeks to come, especially as we get more training camp information and kind of where they're at in the depth chart. And so today, kind of just the gut feeling kind of responses for some of these guys. But for me, as we know, just from history and the data, rookie tight ends, risky. Rookie quarterbacks, hit or miss. Hit or miss. If they hit, usually later on in the season. Cam Newton was kind of a rare guy that, you have your guys here and there. But even Trevor Lawrence, it wasn't great the first year. Part of that was Urban Meyer, but you can go down the list. There's a lot of hit or miss. Running backs, though, oh yeah. Rookie running backs come in and they contribute. These guys can start week one and be highly productive. That's why I believe they should be paid more as young running backs versus old running backs. But for me, I'm targeting these rookies this year. Jahmyr Gibbs, Kendre Miller, Chase Brown, and Tyjae Spears. And so I'll start with Chase Brown and Tyjae Spears. I like those guys because they are playing behind old running backs. Actually, same with Kendre Miller and Alvin Kamara. So with Kamara, Mixon, and Henry, I'm out on all three of those guys. So who's up next? Those three guys. Now in New Orleans, Jamal Williams, he'll be a part of it. But he's not an every down back. He's not a workhorse. So Kendre Miller has some opportunity there in New Orleans, especially with the Kamara suspension looming. And then with Gibbs, I'm a sucker for Detroit Lions running backs. Theo Riddick, Javid Best, DeAndre Swift. I've had them all. I love them all. Was there a guy, Kevin Smith, even years ago?
All these different. Kerryon Johnson, too, a few years ago.
Yep. I had Kerryon for sure. I think there was a Smith at one point, too. I've been playing for 20 years. I've had a lot of running backs from Detroit. Now, have many of them burned me? Absolutely. But I keep going back. I can't help myself. So if Gibbs is there for me in the third round, I'll take him. Any earlier than that, it's too risky. My philosophy is I don't want to take a rookie running back in the first two rounds. So Bijan Robinson, I won't take him this year. Too early for me. Too risky for me. But you jump in.
Yeah. So I agree with you. Rookie running backs are definitely the ones you want to target. I think there's always an opportunity for rookie running backs. But I think the thing to remember with rookie running backs is less to target the situation that they're going into and more to target the talent of the back itself. Because there's a lot of times where, there looks like a rookie running back going to be the RB1, Trey Sermon a few years ago in San Francisco. And then that doesn't end up working out because they realize, oh, he's not really that talented. But if a guy is talented, even if he's behind a star on the depth chart, they'll say, hey, older guy, get out of here. This young rookie's got it. You're taking over him. So I think it's more important to look for talent necessarily with opportunity, which is what you've done with Spears and Brown and Miller, hoping that they supplant guys who are already in front of them. For me, I like rookie wide receivers a lot because I think the same thing with running backs. They can come in and they're just so explosive, so athletic. It's so easy for them to dominate because it's not really that intensive on learning a playbook or schemes. It's, hey, go run a go down the field and just burn the guy in front of you. Moss him on a contested catch. It's easy. Just throw the ball to him. He doesn't have to know what's going on around him. He can still make the catch.
Either have the speed or you don't.
Yeah. And the one rookie wide receiver who I'm really interested in this year is Rashee Rice on the Kansas City Chiefs. Because I think the talent is definitely meeting the opportunity there on the Chiefs. The Chiefs wide receiver room is a mess. Kadarius Toney is already injured in training camp, and he's never been more than a gadget guy in his career. Marquez Valdes-Scantling's good, but he's just a deep threat. He's nothing more than that. Then you have Richie James, who's primarily just been a slot guy. Sky Moore, I'm out on. He couldn't earn targets last year, and who was his competition? Justin Watson. Justin Watson was really getting playing time over Sky Moore. I'm not in on Sky Moore, but Rashee Rice is a second-round pick who profiles as a prototypical outside receiver, big-bodied, great hands, great route runner, was extremely productive in college, broke the single-season receiving record at SMU, where you have guys like Courtland Sutton and Emmanuel Sanders have come out of SMU and had very successful careers. He was better than both those guys. And I think a big part of it, too, is the trust factor. I mean, his college quarterback was Shane Buechele, who was the backup for Kansas City. Him and Patrick Mahomes were working out with each other in the offseason in Texas at Patrick Mahomes' camp. Mahomes personally FaceTime him before they picked him and said, "Hey, congratulations, you're about to be a Kansas City Chiefs." I think that's a huge vote of confidence when the,
I like your reasoning.
Future Hall of Fame quarterback is working out with a guy before the team has even drafted him. I think if Mahomes gave Rashee Rice his vote in the room, I don't see Mahomes, going out and working out with, Richie James or MVS, but I do see him working out with Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce. And we know what that Travis Kelce connection's like. So if anyone is going to be the breakout wide receiver here in Kansas City, I think Rashee Rice is the guy. He's going in the last round of fantasy drafts. So if he's not, you can cut him, but I think the flyer is totally worth it.
All right. You make a good case. I was kind of eyeing Sky Moore, but we'll see about that. And then also, I think you're interested in Zay Flowers with the Ravens, and I'm intrigued by him as well because I didn't mention this earlier. I got my gut feeling is Lamar Jackson has a bounce back year. I hope he stays healthy. Somebody's going to have to catch passes from him. I'm not a big OBJ guy. Rashad Bateman burned me last year, and he's already banged up, I think, or he's got some issue. He hasn't been practicing as much. So that opens up the door for Zay Flowers to come in and potentially be this guy right away.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Zay Flowers. I mean, reports from training camp are that he's been the most impressive receiver out there on the field, which makes sense because this guy is just blazing fast, super athlete. Didn't get a ton of looks, during the college season because he played at Boston College, but there was a reason why he was taken in the first round of the draft. I mean, he's just an unbelievable receiver. And what you have to bet on with Zay Flowers is the fact that he's the only receiver there right now who's actually healthy and not coming off a season-ending injury. I mean, Rashad Bateman is, still getting treatment for his Liz Frank injury. We know how you feel about Liz Frank and hanging out with her. You don't want anyone hanging out with Liz Frank.
No way.
And OBJ, I mean, he spent all of last year injured, recovering. Zay Flowers right now is the only guy who's actually on the field. And I'm just going to bet on the youth and the fact that Lamar is going to find him the ball and that he's going to be able to do a lot with it in his rookie year.
Yeah, I feel good about it too. So, and you can get him a decent price. All right, so there you go. There's some rookies to target. The quarterbacks, I think they will be waiver wire type guys. I think Bryce Young and CJ Stroud could be fantasy relevant at some point in the season, but it'll be kind of after other quarterbacks get injured. You're looking at the waiver wire. They get comfortable in their offenses. They might be okay. Anthony Richardson, I see him ranked pretty high. I don't buy that. I still think Gardner Minshew is going to start the season. So again, maybe Richardson later in the year. And then Will Levis, Tennessee, I'm not interested. So there you go. All right. Speaking of quarterbacks though, let's talk quarterbacks and we're going to take a look at really the top 10 quarterbacks. And for the most part, there isn't a ton of difference between how the majority of people feel about the top 10 quarterbacks. What's interesting though, is when you take them. And when can you get the most value for quarterbacks? And what is your strategy in building a roster? Because if you want Mahomes, then you're going to have to take him early. Definitely in the top 5 rounds, probably in the top 3 rounds, maybe even in the second round, depending on kind of how your league is set up. But that's how early. Now, you can get Trevor Lawrence a little bit later, and I like that value. You can even get Herbert a touch later. Now, of course, you have to consider the running quarterbacks and the extra yardage and points that they get from a fantasy perspective, and that's why Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts are so valuable. That's why even Daniel Jones contributed pretty nicely last year. And there are a few names that I think are interesting too, where, how do you feel about Geno Smith? How do you feel about Daniel Jones? How do you feel about Jared Goff? Those guys were pretty good last year at times. Or at least in Detroit, their offense was so good. Goff didn't necessarily put up huge fantasy numbers, especially because he can even move. But could they score even more points this year? And with Gibbs coming out of the backfield and dumping off maybe a little bit more this year. So a lot of questions around the quarterback position. But just here's off the bat. Here are my rankings. I go Josh Allen, Mahomes, Burrow, Hurts, Herbert, Lamar, Fields, Trevor, Dak, Geno. I'm not drafting Tua. I'm not drafting Deshaun Watson. I'm not drafting Russell Wilson, and I'm not drafting Kyler Murray. So there you go. There, I have no idea what to do with Aaron Rodgers. I it's too the media is swaying me too much on Aaron. I go one way or the other, depending on the day, depending on my gut feeling, going woo woo. So I have no idea about Aaron Rodgers, so I can't comment on him at the moment. But Harrison, why don't you let us know your philosophy on quarterbacks?
Yeah. So my philosophy really is you either want one of the top guys or it's just, it's not worth it to reach for like the QB9. I'm perfectly comfortable taking, Hurts, Mahomes, Allen in the second round of drafts because you
Wow.
know what you're getting there. They're that good. And then I'm fine taking someone like Burrow, Herbert, Lamar. I'm fine grabbing them in, the fourth through sixth rounds of drafts once you have a little bit more built up in your running back and receivers. But I think the biggest mistake people make is when, let's say Trevor Lawrence goes off the board at QB8. And then you don't have you're one of the last three teams without a quarterback. And you say, oh, it's round 9. I have to go get, the QB10 before someone else grabs him. No, you don't. Like QB9 through QB15 are pretty much the same guy on a points per game basis. It's a very small difference, and they all have their big boom weeks and they have their bust weeks. If you're not taking a quarterback, high, there is no reason to stress out about waiting till the last rounds of drafts to grab your QB1 because you're really not going to get that much of a value with a QB in round 10 versus a QB in round 15. Just historically speaking, the value is not there. So it's better to grab, another running back, another receiver, another tight end. So that's my philosophy on it. I think streaming is an extremely valuable option if you don't have one of those top, 5 or 6 guys. And looking at it this year, I think the biggest disagreement that I have with you have Jalen Hurts at 4. I have Jalen Hurts as my number 1 overall quarterback, followed by Patrick Mahomes as 2, Josh Allen at 3, Burrow at 4, Herbert at 5, Justin Fields at 6, Lamar at 7, Trevor Lawrence at 8, Deshaun Watson at 9, and Dak Prescott at 10. But once I get past, Trevor Lawrence at 8, I really don't care who your 9 through 20 is. Those guys are all pretty much the same for me. But I'm going to tell you why I think Jalen Hurts should be the number 1 QB this year in fantasy and why last year was not a fluke. The Eagles' schedule is definitely going to be a lot tougher this year, but that's not going to hurt Jalen Hurts. That's actually going to help him because the Eagles were up so much in a lot of games last year that they never threw the ball in the fourth quarter. Jalen Hurts only played 3 quarters of football. Jalen Hurts had less fourth quarter pass attempts than Baker Mayfield, who switched teams midseason and only started about half the games. And when the games are close, Jalen Hurts is also much more of a focal point in the offense and runs the ball a lot more, which we know how valuable that is for fantasy. In games that were decided by 1 score or less, which, win or loss, he averaged 15 rushing attempts per game. 15, that's more than starting running backs. But in games where they won by 7 or more points, he averaged only 8. He didn't have to do as much. I think the Eagles are going to take a step back, but I think this is just going to force Hurts to do more, and he's going to be motivated coming off the Super Bowl loss. He's going to be motivated losing the MVP to Patrick Mahomes, and he's going to come and he's going to be fighting for the MVP and wants the respect to be put up there with the Josh Allens, with the Joe Burrows of the world. I think he's going to have another fantastic season for fantasy.
Hurts is awesome. However, 2 reasons. One, the Super Bowl hangover. It makes me nervous. I can't trust it. We saw last year with the Rams, and we've just seen it over the years with the teams the following year. There oftentimes just so many issues. So that makes me nervous with the Eagles. But I love A.J. Brown. I'm targeting A.J. Brown. He's just so talented. And so, yeah, Hurts is still right in the mix. The reason I have Josh Allen number 1 is in my main fantasy league, he has won the last 2 years. So he's the most valuable guy. He's won, and especially one of my buddies, he won twice with him. He's not even that good at fantasy, but he had Josh Allen. So if you have Josh Allen in my league, you win. So that's why he's number 1 on my rankings. And the reason I have Burrow at 3 is I just don't think. Now I said I like I'm nervous about Joe Mixon and the running game. I think they're going to rely on Joe Burrow even more this year. And let's face it, they're loaded at receiver. They're unbelievable at receiver. And Joe Burrow, I don't think he'll sign this. I guess him and Justin Herbert are both kind of up for a contract. So we'll see if Burrow gets that deal or if he waits a little bit longer. But anyway, either way, he's going to live up to the huge contract, and he's unbelievable. So he doesn't run as much, so I understand that the him or Herbert for that matter, but they throw and they're so good. So I like Burrow a lot. The one guy in there too, Dak Prescott, I mentioned earlier. I like Dallas this year, the offense. So their defense is awesome too. So Dallas and the NFC's down. I think that could be nice. And then I was a hater of Geno Smith. First team all hate. There's no doubt about it. I was like, there's no way. I mean, the start of his career just was not good. He goes out to Seattle. He's got all these weapons. Are you kidding me? Absolutely. Oh, and then the second thing with Jalen Hurts, he's got Rashad Penny now. He's got DeAndre Swift now. The Eagles invested in running backs that they want. They didn't like Miles Sanders. They weren't willing to give him as many carries, it seemed, especially in the Super Bowl. And so I think with those two guys, Hurts runs a little bit less. So that'd be my other reason to move him down the rankings a little bit. So any other thoughts?
Yeah. So last thoughts with the Cowboys. I don't know. I'm just scared with Mike McCarthy. It's just concerning to me. And I feel like every year the Cowboys get hyped up and always disappointed, but I see where you're coming from with Dak. And then Geno Smith. Geno Smith finished as the QB5 last year in fantasy, which is just absurd to me. He finished, ahead of Trevor Lawrence and ahead of Justin Herbert and all these guys who are now going ahead of him this year. He's completely fallen down the boards. But everything has gotten better for him in his situation. He's in the second year of the offense, and they've invested in him by giving him a big contract. They want him there. They could have easily said, no, we don't want you. We have a top pick. We're going to take another quarterback, but they chose Geno. And then not only did they choose Geno, they go out and they draft the best receiver in the draft. They take another running back in round 2. They're surrounding him with weapons because they want him to succeed. Geno Smith, to me, feels a lot like Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill was awful in Miami. No one wanted Ryan Tannehill. Then he goes to a team that actually wants him in the Tennessee Titans, and he does great. Obviously now, he's starting to hit the end of his career a little bit, but there was a 3-year stretch there where Ryan Tannehill is a great fantasy quarterback. I think the same thing's going to happen with Geno. Get him out of the Jets. Get him out of bad organizations where no one can succeed. Put him with Pete Carroll. Put him with weapons. I think he's going to have a nice little run here to the end of his career. I don't think it was just a 1-year fluke. I think he's going to be solid for the next, 2 to 3 seasons and is a viable option for fantasy yet again. I don't know if he'll be top 5 fantasy again, but I think he can definitely be in that QB 9, 10, 11 range.
The value, the ADP for Geno, that's where you got it. So you got to find the value. Where you know what? The problem with Justin Fields, to me, overvalued. I like Fields. I think he could be awesome, but he's kind of the hot name this year. And so you have to pay a little bit more than I want for Fields because there still are some question marks. But get the guys that are proven. You can trust in. If you want a guy that you can count on, of course, Allen, Mahomes, Burrow. The value of Herbert, I think, is pretty good. The value of Lawrence is good. And if you want to wait a little bit, Dak. So, but don't buy the hype with Russell Wilson. Let him fall. If you have to have him, let him fall to you, please. I won't be taking him. But that's just because he burned me last year. And then with Aaron Rodgers, it's such a toss-up. I'm just not willing to take the risk. That's one of those, you roll the dice. He could be awesome and have a huge year for the Jets. Great. And right now you can get him a little bit later. So we'll see how that changes over the next few weeks. And I think there will be some more hype surrounding him. All right. Well, we could talk all day. We'll save some of this for next week as we get more news and information, and we'll try to filter through it. And hopefully you were encouraged today by our topic about our gut feeling. And so let's live spirit-filled lives and making wise decisions as we follow the Holy Spirit within us. And so if you have any questions, fantasy related, faith related, you can email me, Bryce@fantasyfootballfellowship.com. If you have an email or if you have a question for Harrison, just email me. I'll forward it to him. We'll figure it out. So thanks to Harrison. Great insight as always. Everybody check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Harrison has his rankings, so you can see a little bit more in depth on what he's thinking. And so become a member today, fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Have a great rest of your day. For Harrison, I'm Bryce. Thanks for being with us. I'm a sports fan who follows Jesus. I believe in the good news that he died on the cross for my sin. He was resurrected, and through faith, I've been saved by his grace. I hope that is true for you as well, and I hope you'll join me as we live life as sports fans and fantasy managers who follow Jesus together. Have a great one. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast.